Let's get started. Story number 1.
The cold February wind rattled against the windows of the small apartment, carrying with it a heavy silence that pressed against Claire's chest. She sat on the couch, staring at the framed photograph on the coffee table, her and Daniel, smiling, arms wrapped around each other. It had been almost a year since he had died. A hit and run. Valentine's Day. They had planned a quiet night together, just dinner at their favorite Italian restaurant. Claire had been waiting at their table, checking her phone every few minutes, wondering why he was late. Then the call came. A drunk driver. Daniel had been crossing the street to the restaurant when it happened. The driver never stopped. Claire hadn't celebrated Valentine's Day since. Tonight, she just wanted to be alone. She ignored the unopened box of chocolates her sister had sent and the pile of unread messages from friends checking in. Instead, she curled up with a blanket and stared at the flickering candle on the table, lost in thought. Then the text came. It was from Daniel's number. "I miss you." Claire's breath caught in her throat. Her fingers tightened around the phone. His number had been disconnected after his death. She had called it herself, listened to the automated message telling her the line was no longer in service. A cruel joke. That's what this had to be. Someone had gotten his old number and decided to torment her. She swallowed hard and typed back. "Who is this?" A moment later, another message appeared. "You don't remember? It's our anniversary." Claire's hands trembled. Her heart pounded so hard she could hear it. "This isn't funny. Stop." 3 dots appeared, signaling a reply. Then the message came. "Look outside." Her breath hitched. Slowly, she turned her head toward the window. Her apartment was on the 3rd floor, she hacked, overlooking the quiet street below. It was late, and the sidewalks were mostly empty, the occasional car passing by. Then she saw him, a man standing across the street, just beneath the glow of the street lamp. Her stomach twisted. He was wearing the same dark jacket Daniel had worn that night, the same jeans, the same face. Daniel. Claire's entire body went cold. It wasn't possible. It couldn't be. Her phone vibrated again. "I came back for you." Her vision blurred with tears. She wanted to move, to run, to scream, but she couldn't. The figure didn't move. He just stood there, staring up at her window. Then, slowly, he lifted his hand and waved. Claire gasped, her fingers gripping the armrest so tightly her nails dug into the fabric. This wasn't real. It couldn't be real. Then she blinked, and he was gone. Her phone vibrated once more. "See you soon." Claire dropped the phone. Her breath came in short, panicked gasps. She pressed her hands to her mouth, trying to steady herself. A nightmare. A grief-fueled hallucination. That had to be it. But then, the scent filled the room. Cologne. His cologne. Fresh, unmistakable, as if he had just walked past her. Claire's hands shook as she reached for the candle on the table. The flame flickered violently, as though disturbed by an invisible breath. Then, in the dim light, she saw something on the window pane. A handprint. Faint. Fogged against the glass, as if someone had pressed their palm there from the outside, even though the window had never been opened. Claire's heart pounded in her ears. She grabbed her phone, scrambled toward her bedroom, and locked the door behind her. But as she pressed her back against the wood, she heard it. A soft whisper, right behind her. "Happy Valentine's Day, Claire." Story the end.
Story number 2.
The town of Hollow Pines had always celebrated Valentine's Day with a grand festival, heart-shaped decorations hanging from every storefront, couples strolling down the lantern-lit streets, and music filling the crisp February air. But hidden beneath the charm of the town was a dark secret, whispered only among the elders and the wary, the legend of the Weeping Bride. It was said that many years ago, a woman named Eleanor Whitmore had been left waiting at the altar on Valentine's Day. Her fiancé, Thomas, had vanished without a trace. Heartbroken and humiliated, Eleanor roamed the cold, deserted streets in her wedding gown, searching for him. The next morning, she was found dead in the frozen river, her bouquet still clutched in her pale hands. Some claimed it was heartbreak. Others believed she had been taken by something unseen. Since then, every Valentine's night, a lone figure in a tattered wedding dress was said to wander through Hollow Pines, searching for lost love. Olivia had heard the stories growing up, but never gave them much thought. She had moved away for college and hadn't been back to Hollow Pines in years. But this year, Valentine's Day aligned with the anniversary of her parents' wedding, and her mother had insisted she visit. "It's just one night, sweetheart," her mother had said over the phone. "It'll be nice to have you home." Olivia arrived just as the festival was beginning. The town square was alive with laughter and music, couples dancing under strings of glowing red and pink lights. She met up with her childhood friends, Emily and Jake, at their old favorite cafe, and after catching up over coffee and pastries, they decided to walk through town. "Did you know this is the 100th anniversary of the Weeping Bride?" Emily mused as they passed the old church where Eleanor had once stood, waiting. "Yeah, and guess what?" Jake added, lowering his voice dramatically. "Legend says that every 100 years she doesn't just appear, she chooses someone." Olivia rolled her eyes. "Please, every town has a ghost story to scare kids." Emily smirked. "Well, then you won't mind taking a little walk with us after midnight?" Jake nudged her. "You scared, Liv?" "Of course not," she said, feigning confidence. At precisely midnight, the three of them stood at the edge of the frozen river where Eleanor had died. The moonlight glistened off the ice, casting eerie reflections against the dark trees. The air was bitterly cold, and Olivia felt an uneasy prickle crawl up her spine. "This is stupid," she muttered, wrapping her coat tighter. "There's nothing here." Jake chuckled. "Give it a sec." The wind picked up suddenly, howling through the trees. Then, faintly, there was a sound like the rustling of fabric against the ice. Olivia turned sharply. A figure stood on the riverbank. It was a woman draped in what looked like a torn, dirt-streaked wedding dress. Her face was obscured by a veil, but Olivia could see her breath in the cold air. She was facing them. The three of them stood frozen. Emily whispered, "No way." The woman took a slow, deliberate step forward. A sickly, sweet scent filled the air, like decaying flowers. Olivia's heart pounded as the figure lifted a gloved hand, pointing directly at her. A whisper cut through the silence. "Help me." The words sent a jolt of terror through Olivia's body. Without thinking, she turned and ran, her breath coming in frantic gasps. Emily and Jake followed, their footsteps crunching against the frost-covered ground. They didn't stop until they reached the bright, bustling square. The music and chatter of the festival seemed surreal compared to what they had just seen. Jake doubled over, panting, "Tell me you both saw that." Emily nodded, her face pale. She spoke." Olivia felt an icy grip on her chest. "She pointed at me." They decided to forget what had happened, chalking it up to an elaborate prank or shared hallucination. But as Olivia lay in bed that night, she couldn't shake the feeling that she wasn't alone. At exactly 3 a.m., a creaking sound echoed through the house. It was coming from downstairs. Olivia sat up, listening. Her parents were asleep. Heart pounding, she tiptoed down the hall and peeked over the staircase. A trail of wet footprints led from the front door to the base of the stairs. Her breath hitched. The footprints were small, like a woman's, but there was no sign of anyone. Shaking, Olivia backed away and returned to her room, locking the door. She barely slept, flinching at every sound. The next morning, she told her mother about the footprints. "It's just snow from outside, sweetheart," her mother reassured her, but Olivia could see the flicker of unease in her eyes. The rest of the day passed uneventfully, and Olivia convinced herself it had all been her imagination. That night, however, things got worse. At 3 a.m., she woke to a soft, scratching sound, like nails against wood. It was coming from her bedroom window. She turned her head slowly, like dread sinking into her stomach. Outside, pressed against the glass, was a face. The veil was still over it, but Olivia could make out dark, hollow eyes beneath it. A gloved hand scraped against the window, slow and deliberate. "Help me." The whisper was clearer this time, and Olivia could see the lips moving under the veil. Then the woman lifted her hand and pressed something against the glass. It was a single, withered rose. Olivia screamed. Her parents burst into the room with this turning on the lights. But when they rushed to the window, there was nothing there. No footprints, no sign of anyone. The next morning, Olivia was packed and ready to leave town. Before she left, her mother pulled her aside. "You need to be careful, Olivia," she said, her voice tight with worry. "There are things in this town, things you don't provoke." Olivia didn't argue. She just wanted to get away. As she drove out of Hollow Pines, she glanced at her rearview mirror. Standing on the side of the road was the woman in the wedding dress, watching her. The veil lifted slightly, revealing cracked, bloodless lips. Olivia looked away, heart hammering, and pressed the gas pedal. She never returned to Hollow Pines again. But every year on Valentine's Day, she receives a single withered rose in the mail. No return address. No explanation. Just a whisper in the wind. Help me. Story the end.
Story number 3.
The town of Ravenswood had its share of forgotten tragedies, but none lingered in whispers quite like the story of Eleanor Caldwell. 100 years ago, Eleanor was set to be married on Valentine's Day to a man named Henry Porter. Their love was the kind found in novels, passionate, undeniable. The wedding was to be held in the grand Caldwell estate, a towering Victorian home at the edge of town. But fate had other plans. On the morning of her wedding, Henry was found dead, his body discovered near the riverbank, his skull cracked against the jagged rocks. Some said he slipped. Others said something, or someone, had pushed him. Eleanor never made it to the altar. She locked herself away in her bedroom, still dressed in her wedding gown, clutching the veil Henry had chosen for her. 3 days later, the servants found her lifeless, the lace of her dress soaked in her own blood. They said she died of a broken heart, but the town knew better. Since then, every Valentine's night, the Caldwell house would glow with candlelight, though no one lived there. People reported hearing the faint melody of a piano, the sorrowful hum of a woman's voice, and most unsettling of all, the sound of weeping. Sarah had heard these stories all her life, but she never believed them. She was a journalist, someone who relied on facts, not ghost stories. So when she was assigned to write a feature on the history of the Caldwell house, she saw an opportunity. If she could prove that nothing haunted the place, maybe she could finally put the legend to rest. On the evening of February 14th, she made her way to the abandoned estate. The house stood just as it had for over a century, its dark silhouette looming against the night sky. The iron gates creaked as she pushed through, her boots crunching against the dead leaves that covered the path. The front door was locked, but the side entrance, weathered and rotting, opened with a single push. Inside, the air was thick with dust and decay. Cobwebs clung to the chandeliers, and the faded wallpaper curled at the edges. She shined her flashlight along the walls, her breath visible in the frigid air. The grand staircase led to the second floor, where Eleanor's bedroom remained untouched. Sarah hesitated. She wasn't afraid. At least, that's what she told herself. Then, somewhere in the darkness, a sound. A piano. Her heart pounded. It was faint, distant, but unmistakable. The slow, sorrowful notes of a song long forgotten. She swallowed hard and followed the sound. The parlor doors were slightly ajar. She nudged one open, revealing a grand piano bathed in moonlight. The keys moved. Soft, deliberate strokes pressed into the ivory, but there was no one there. Sarah's breath hitched, then a whisper. He promised. She turned sharply, the beam of her flashlight sweeping across the room. No one. Just shadows, dust, silence. She took a shaky breath, steadying herself. It had to be her mind playing tricks, the power of suggestion. That's all. Then she noticed the footprints, small, delicate imprints in the dust-covered floor leading toward the staircase. Sarah forced herself forward, following the path. The steps groaned beneath her weight as she climbed. At the top, a door stood slightly open. Eleanor's room. Her hand trembled as she pushed it wide. The bedroom was untouched, frozen in time. A wedding dress lay draped across the bed, yellowed with age. The vanity mirror was cracked, yet reflected her face perfectly. Then, movement. The veil, the one Henry had given Eleanor, lay neatly on the chair, and it was rising, as if someone unseen was lifting it. Sarah took a step back. The air grew heavier, thick with the scent of roses, decayed, withered. A shadow shifted near the window. She turned, and for the first time she saw her. Eleanor. She stood in the moonlight, her wedding dress clinging to her thin frame, her dark eyes hollow and distant. Sarah couldn't breathe. Eleanor lifted the veil to her face, her fingers ghosting over the delicate lace. Then she turned to Sarah. He promised he'd come back. The words were barely a whisper, yet they filled the entire room. Then, as suddenly as she appeared, she was gone. The air shifted. The veil dropped lifelessly onto the chair. The house was silent once more. Sarah didn't remember running, only the slam of the door behind her, the bite of the cold air as she reached her car, hands trembling as she fumbled with the keys. She never returned to the Caldwell house, but every Valentine's night she hears the piano and the sound of a woman weeping. Story, the end.
Story number 4.
The old oak tree behind Holloway Manor had seen centuries of love, heartbreak, and loss. Locals called it the lover's grave, and for good reason. Legend had it that a woman in a crimson dress once hanged herself from its thickest branch after her lover abandoned her on Valentine's Day. Since then, every February 14th, whispers echoed through the dead leaves, and shadowy figures moved in the moonlight. Lillian never believed in ghost stories. She was a practical woman, a journalist looking for her next article. When she heard about the legend, she thought it was nothing more than a desperate attempt to make a forgotten town interesting. But that changed when she received the letter. It arrived at her office in an envelope sealed with wax, no return address. Inside was a single sheet of parchment, aged and brittle, with just a few words written in blood-red ink. Come to Holloway Manor before midnight. You will find the truth. It was Valentine's Day. Lillian had planned to spend the evening at home, curled up with wine and a crime documentary. Instead, she found herself driving through the misty back roads of Holloway, her headlights barely cutting through the fog. The manor loomed ahead, a towering relic of a bygone era. It had been abandoned for decades, yet its silhouette was hauntingly beautiful against the full moon. She stepped out of the car, the cold biting through her coat. The oak tree stood in the backyard, twisted and gnarled. A thick, tattered noose swayed gently from the lowest branch. Lillian swallowed hard. This was ridiculous. Ghosts weren't real. But then she saw her. A woman in a crimson dress. She was standing beneath the tree, her back to Lillian, long dark hair flowing as if caught in an invisible breeze. "Hello?" Lillian called. The woman turned. Lillian's breath hitched. The face was pale, almost colorless, with deep, hollow eyes that seemed to sink into eternity. Her lips were painted red, too red, like smeared blood. She opened her mouth, but no words came out. Instead, the air around her shimmered with a strange, suffocating energy. Lillian wanted to run, but her feet were rooted to the ground. The woman raised a single bony hand and pointed toward the manor. The front door creaked open. Lillian didn't want to go inside, but something compelled her forward. The moment she stepped through the threshold, the air turned thick and stale. Candlelight flickered from unseen sources, casting long, grotesque shadows on the peeling wallpaper. Then she heard it, a whisper. He lied. He left me. He swore he'd love me forever. He broke his promise. Lillian turned sharply, but the hallway behind her was empty. Footsteps echoed above. She wasn't alone. Her heart pounded as she climbed the grand staircase, each step groaning under her weight. At the top, she saw a door slightly ajar, candlelight flickering inside. She pushed it open. The room was frozen in time. A four-poster bed draped in dusty lace, a vanity covered in yellowed letters, a cracked mirror reflecting the ghostly candlelight. And then, on the wall, she saw it. A name, carved deep into the wood. Eleanor Holloway. Lillian's stomach clenched. That was the woman's name. The one from the legend, the one who died here, waiting for a lover who never came. The mirror suddenly fogged over, as if someone were breathing against it. Then, slowly, letters began to appear. He still walks this house. A chill crawled up Lillian's spine. She spun around just as the door slammed shut. Darkness swallowed the room. The whispering grew louder, desperate, angry. He still walks this house. The floor creaked behind her. Lillian held her breath. A hand, ice cold and skeletal, touched her shoulder. She screamed. The room vanished. Lillian found herself standing outside beneath the oak tree, gasping for breath. Her car was still parked where she left it. The manor was dark again, lifeless. The noose on the tree was gone. Had it been a dream? A hallucination? She turned to leave, but something in the dirt caught her eye. A single, fresh rose, blood red. Lillian didn't sleep that night. She researched Eleanor Holloway, determined to separate truth from legend. What she found sent a shiver down her spine. Eleanor hadn't died alone. Her lover, the man who had betrayed her, had been found dead exactly 1 year after she hanged herself, his body dangling from the same oak tree. And every year since, another man had gone missing on Valentine's Day. Lillian's breath turned to ice, because she wasn't the only one who had received the letter that night. The next morning, a report surfaced. A man had vanished near Holloway Manor. His car was found parked outside, and beneath the oak tree, in the freshly turned soil, a second rose. Story the end.
Story number 5.
The air in Brooksville had a sharp bite that winter. the kind that settled deep into your bones. Snow still clung to the streets despite the passing days, turning into slushy puddles underfoot. The town was gearing up for Valentine's Day with pink and red decorations in every shop window. But there was one place untouched by the holiday cheer, the abandoned Willowcrest Inn. Everyone in town knew the story. Decades ago, a young couple had checked in for a romantic Valentine's getaway. They never checked out. Staff found them the next morning, the man lifeless in bed, his fiancée curled beside him, dead from an apparent overdose. It was tragic, but rumors soon spread. Claims that the woman had been seen walking through the halls long after her death. Some said she was looking for her lover. Others believed she had been murdered. Now the inn sat in silence, its once grand exterior crumbling under years of neglect. No one dared step inside, no one except Daniel. Daniel had never believed in ghosts. He had grown up hearing the stories, but they were just that, stories. A distraction from real life. That's why when his friends dared him to spend Valentine's night inside the Willowcrest Inn, he agreed without hesitation. Just one night, Jake grinned. You spend the night, we pay you $100. Daniel shrugged. Easy money. His girlfriend Claire wasn't thrilled. It's stupid, she told him, and creepy. It's a harmless old hotel, Daniel reassured her. I'll be fine. But Claire wasn't convinced. The night of February 14th, Daniel arrived at the Willowcrest Inn just before midnight. Snow had started falling again, dusting the steps leading to the grand entrance. With a deep breath, he pushed open the heavy wooden doors, the hinges groaning in protest. Inside, the air was stale, thick with dust and decay. The grand chandelier, once brilliant, hung in shambles, its crystals coated in cobwebs. The check-in desk stood frozen in time, an old guest book still open, the ink faded from age. He pulled out his phone and took a quick video. See? He said, his voice echoing in the empty lobby. Nothing but an old building. His plan was simple. Find a room, wait out the night, and collect his money. He picked a suite on the second floor where the infamous couple had stayed. The bed was still there, sheets yellowed with time. A broken vanity stood against the wall, its mirror cracked down the center. As he settled in, a noise caught his attention. A soft shuffling like footsteps. Daniel froze. He turned toward the doorway, but there was nothing, just the empty hall beyond. Brushing it off, he sat on the edge of the bed and pulled out his phone to text Claire. Still alive. You worry too much. The message didn't send. No signal. With a sigh, he lay back against the musty pillows. The wind outside howled against the windows, rattling the glass. Then a whisper. Soft, almost too quiet to hear. Daniel, his breath caught. He bolted upright, heart pounding. Hello? He called. Silence. He swallowed hard. It had to be the wind or maybe an animal scurrying through the walls. Then he saw it. A shadow in the corner of the room, not moving, not shifting, just standing, a figure. His pulse thundered as he fumbled for his flashlight. When he clicked it on, the corner was empty. His breath came in short gasps. Okay, he muttered. This place is just messing with me. He checked his phone again. Still no signal. Deciding to get some air, he grabbed his jacket and stepped into the hall. The corridor stretched in both directions, dim and lifeless. His footsteps echoed as he walked toward the stairs. Then a voice. A woman's voice. Wait. He turned sharply. A woman stood at the end of the hallway. She was in a long white dress, her dark hair cascading over her shoulders. Her face was pale, almost too pale. Daniel's mouth went dry. Are you lost? He asked, forcing his voice to stay steady. The woman tilted her head. Do you know where he is? Daniel frowned. Who? She stepped closer. The air grew impossibly cold. He was supposed to meet me here. His legs felt like lead. You mean your boyfriend? He asked carefully. Her face twisted. He left me. The hallway lights flickered. Daniel stumbled back, panic clawing at his chest. She took another step forward. Her eyes were hollow, dark voids sinking into her skull. I waited, she whispered, but he never came back. Daniel turned and ran. His feet pounded against the floor as he bolted down the stairs. The air felt thick, suffocating. Behind him, the whisper chased him. Don't leave me. The front doors wouldn't budge. He yanked, but they remained shut. The wood ice cold under his fingers. A reflection caught his eye. In the cracked lobby mirror, she stood behind him. Closer now. Her lips curled into a smile. Stay with me. Daniel screamed. Everything went black. He woke up outside. The snow was falling heavier now, soaking into his clothes. His head throbbed as he sat up, his breath coming in ragged gasps. The Willowcrest Inn loomed behind him, its windows dark and empty. His phone buzzed in his pocket. A message from Claire. "Daniel, are you okay?" Hands shaking, he typed back. "I'm coming home." He never spoke of that night again, but every Valentine's Day he dreams of her, standing in that hallway, waiting, smiling, and whispering his name. Story the end.
Story number 6.
The old town of Millfield had its fair share of ghost stories, but none were as chilling as the ones surrounding the Whitmore house. It had stood for over a century, a once grand Victorian home that had been abandoned for decades. Locals swore it was cursed, a place where love turned to tragedy, and it all started on Valentine's Day. Back in 1923, Elizabeth Whitmore had been found dead in her bedroom, still dressed in the red silk gown she had worn for a Valentine's dinner. She had been waiting for her fiancé Charles to return from a business trip, but he never made it. His body was discovered miles away, his car wrecked along a desolate road. The police said it was an accident, but Elizabeth didn't believe it. She stayed up all night, staring out the window, waiting. The next morning, the maid found her lifeless body, her cold fingers clutching the letter he had written her before he died. The house had been empty ever since, and every Valentine's Day, people claimed to see a figure in red standing by the window, still waiting for her lost love. Of course, it was just an old story, or so Lily thought. Lily had never believed in ghosts. She had grown up hearing the town's legends, but they never scared her. That's why, when her friends dared her to spend the night in the Whitmore house on Valentine's Day, she accepted without hesitation. "Come on, it's perfect," Jake had said, grinning. "One night, we'll bring snacks, take some pictures, and prove once and for all that the place isn't haunted." "Unless you're scared," Emily teased. Lily smirked. "Not a chance." And so, on the evening of February 14th, they made their way to the Whitmore house. The air was cold, the sky a deep, endless black. The house loomed before them, its once beautiful exterior now crumbling with age. The windows were shattered in places, ivy creeping up the walls like skeletal fingers. Jake pushed open the front door, the hinges groaning in protest. "Ladies first." Lily rolled her eyes and stepped inside. The air was thick with dust, and the faint scent of something old, something decayed, lingered. The grand chandelier in the foyer hung lifeless, its crystals dulled by time. An ornate staircase curled upward, leading to the second floor where Elizabeth's room was. "Creepy," Emily muttered. Lily shrugged. "It's just an old house." They set up in the living room, spreading out blankets and snacks, laughing as they took turns telling ghost stories. The night dragged on, and eventually the laughter died down. Then came the whispers. At first, Lily thought she imagined it, a faint, almost musical sound drifting through the air. She glanced at Emily, who was staring at the ceiling. "Did you hear that?" Emily asked, voice barely above a whisper. Jake chuckled nervously. "Probably the wind." But Lily wasn't so sure. The house had been silent all night, and now there was something, a sound, like a soft sigh. Then footsteps, slow, deliberate, coming from upstairs. Lily's breath hitched. She exchanged a glance with Jake, whose face had gone pale. "Maybe we should check it out," he suggested, though his voice wavered. Lily hesitated. Every instinct told her to stay put, but she had never backed down from a challenge. Taking a deep breath, she grabbed her flashlight and made her way up the stairs. The hallway was long and narrow, lined with old, dust-covered portraits. The air grew colder with every step. She reached the door to Elizabeth's bedroom. It was slightly ajar. A flickering light came from inside. Lily's heart pounded. She pushed the door open. The room was just as the stories described. The large bed was still covered in tattered red silk sheets. An old vanity stood against the wall, its mirror cracked down the center. A wardrobe door hung open, revealing faded dresses inside. But what caught her attention was the candle on the nightstand. It was lit. The flame danced, casting eerie shadows against the walls. "Guys," Lily whispered. "The candle." A cold breath touched her neck. Her blood ran ice cold. She spun around, but there was no one there. Then she saw it, the mirror, a reflection that wasn't hers. A woman in a red dress stood behind her, her face pale, her dark eyes hollow and sorrowful. Her lips moved, but no sound came out. Lily stumbled back, knocking over the candle. The flame went out, plunging the room into darkness. She heard Emily scream from downstairs. Panicked, she bolted for the hallway. As she reached the top of the stairs, the air thickened like an invisible force was pressing down on her. Then the whisper came again. He was supposed to come back. Lily felt a chill run through her bones. She turned toward the bedroom. The woman in red was standing in the doorway now, watching her. Her lips parted. Where is he? Lily didn't wait to find out. She ran. She nearly tripped down the stairs, reaching the living room where Emily and Jake were already grabbing their things. Go! Go! Jake shouted. They bolted out of the house, not stopping until they reached the car. They sped off, hearts hammering, none of them speaking for several miles. Finally, Emily broke the silence. You saw her, didn't you? She whispered. Lily nodded, her hands still shaking. Jake exhaled. We are never doing that again, Lily agreed. But that wasn't the end. That night, as she lay in bed, unable to sleep, her phone vibrated on her nightstand. A message, no number, no contact name, just 3 words. Where is he? Story, the end.